Good morning, all. Thank you very much for being here. Please give our speaker for the morning, Edward de Bono, a warm welcome. Let me say a few words about how this session will work. First of all, I'd like to share some words of welcome for Edward's participation. Then we will continue in a kind of a dialogue format. I have a few questions for Edward, and Edward will respond to those. We had a chance to meet yesterday and talk about the flow of ideas. And then in the last 10 or 15 minutes, we will open the floor for questions. During that period, there will be portable microphones around, and we will try to figure out how to manage questions both in Spanish and in English. So that's the grand plan. So to get started on that grand plan, first, it's tremendously important to offer some words of appreciation for the influence Edward has had on attention to a more thoughtful society over the past half-century, really. Edward is very well known for key books and key ideas, for instance, Lateral Thinking, the 6 Thinking Hats, the COURT program, Cognitive Research Trust, which has seen application in thousands of schools. Edward is the author of 85 books that have been translated into 46 languages. Very impressive productivity. There's a new book coming out about thinking to create value, so we look forward to seeing that soon. Also, a special note of thanks for Edward's participation in the international conferences on thinking. Edward has not been at quite all of them, but he has been at most of them. And that has been a serious addition to what we've been able to share with the world. So we appreciate that very much. Thank you, Edward, for all these years.
I'm going to start with a new word, which I invented 3 years ago, but which we have needed for 2,400 years. Why 2,400 years? Because 2,400 years ago, the Greeks were known for their thinking, not for being bankrupt. So we have needed this new word for 2,400 years. The word is Ebne, E-B-N-E. What it means is excellent, but not enough. Now, the reason we needed that word is that in the normal process of thinking, if the other side is wrong, you say it's wrong. And if it's excellent, you say, no, it's wrong. So we need a way of saying it's excellent, but it's not enough. Suppose, for example, we have a chef, and this chef is fantastic at making scrambled eggs. He's the best in his world at making scrambled eggs. But he can't make anything else. He can't cook beef or fish or anything, just scrambled eggs. So it would be bad to say he's wrong. Not. He's Ebne. He's excellent, but not enough. So it's a word we've needed for a long time, and there are many things in our life where we should apply Ebne. One is democracy. Democracy is excellent, but we can do better. And the other is thinking. Excellent, but not enough.
So, why do you think Ebne is something in need of special attention at this historical moment? Why now? Why not entirely for the last 2,400 years? Is this a special moment?
In a way, it's a special moment. One of the problems with our thinking is that in the Middle Ages, the church ran schools, university, and thinking. And so everyone in thinking was concerned with finding the truth, because the church wanted the truth to prove heretics wrong and to support their belief structure. So the sole purpose of thinking became to find the truth. And it still is today, scientific thinking and so on. And yet there are many other aspects of thinking, creating value, action, creativity, all of which are very important parts of thinking, which we have almost totally neglected. For example, I doubt whether there is a single university in the world anywhere which has a faculty of thinking. The nearest might be in my home in Malta, has a faculty devoted to my work, but that's not specifically on thinking. So really we have neglected thinking because we have thought it is excellent. And the answer is it's Ebner. It is excellent, but not enough.
Well, you've been thinking about thinking for, 50 years or so?
50 years.
Maybe we can roll back the clock a moment. My understanding is that you actually began as a medical doctor. You're a doctor, but many people don't know you're a medical doctor.
Well,
where did the thinking business come from?
Well, actually, I'm 7 sorts of doctor. I'm doctor of medicine, doctor of philosophy, doctor of law, doctor of design, all these things.
Well, where did it start?
Yes, anyway.
What was first?
Anyway, medicine and I was working on different systems in the body, kidneys, glands, the heart, and everything. And then started looking at system behavior in the body, and I'd done a degree in psychology at Oxford as well. So I applied some of this thinking to the brain, and I'd written a book called The Mechanism of Mind. This was picked up by the leading physicist in the world, Professor Murray Gell-Mann, who got his Nobel Prize for discovering the quark. He was very enthusiastic. He commissioned a team of computer scientists to simulate what I said in the book, and he said, yes, it works exactly as you said. And he's been a great supporter. So the mechanism of mind is how the brain works. From that came an understanding of the brain. For example, the most significant behavior of the brain is one which most people would never think of, and indeed no philosophers or psychologists have ever thought of it. The most significant behavior of the brain is humor. Because humor indicates a patterning system. Take, for example, the story. An old man of 90 goes down to hell. As he's wandering through hell, he sees a friend of his, also age 90, sitting there with a beautiful blonde sitting on his knee. So he says to his friend, are you sure this is hell? Because you seem to be having rather a good time. And the friend looks up and says, no, he says, it's hell all right, he said. He said, I am the punishment for her. So when I go to hell, I'm going to ask for that position. Now, the point about humor is you go along a track. When you get there, suddenly there's another explanation. That's what is a surprise, the humor. So the brain is a patterning system. And indeed, the lateral thinking is based on the logic of patterning systems.
Can you connect this notion of pattern making and pattern breaking to Ebner? What's the connection between mechanisms of mind and Ebner, excellent but not enough?
Ebner is that our existing thinking is excellent in one respect, which is the logic, language logic, it is excellent. But there's many other areas it just doesn't exist at all. Creativity, thinking for action, thinking to create value, many of these others exist. Indeed, a lot of our thinking is what I call caveman thinking. A caveman comes out of the cave, and he sees an object, he recognizes it, so he applies the standard remedy. In other words, look at situations, try and discover the standard situation, apply a standard response. That's exactly like doctors in a clinic. A patient comes in, the doctor puts all his effort into diagnosing the standard illness, because once you do that, you apply the standard remedy. So that's our caveman thinking. One day as a doctor, because I worked as a doctor in the hospital, I had a patient with a terrible disease for which there was no known cure. This disease, the patient had to spend his whole life in bed, because if he stood up, he collapsed. He had to spend his whole life flat in bed. So it's a well-known disease, but very rare. So I had this patient. There's no standard remedy, so I thought about it, and I discovered the cure. The cure was no medicine, no surgery. All that happens is the bed, when he goes to sleep, is tilted a little degree head up. What happens was the kidneys were oversensitive. When he lay flat, the kidney says we have too much blood, got rid of salt and water. He never had enough blood, so when he stood up, he fainted. Slight tilt, the kidneys say we don't have enough blood, hangs on to the blood, and he has a totally normal life. No medication, no such, as simple as that. That is now the standard treatment of this situation. But that's because there was no standard treatment. I had to do some thinking. So the difficulty is that if we have a standard treatment, we try and use it. For example, today, the situation in Syria is precisely because there is no standard situation. Is it an unsuccessful resolution? Is it a successful revolution? Is it a civil war? It is not a standard situation, so we don't know what to do. On the contrary, if we examine the situation, we can see the opportunity arising, which is, from the situation in Syria, we could create the concept of a dual government, a two-part government. There's the government of stability, which would be run by Bashar al-Assad, who's in charge of the police, the army, the law courts. And then we have the government of welfare, which is run by an elected parliament. And that concept of dual government would apply to many countries in the Middle East. A government of stability, keeping stability, and then a government of welfare, organizing the welfare. So we should take something from it instead of feeling it's not a standard situation, we can't do anything.
Excellent, not enough, and pattern breaking, a la mechanisms of mind.
Yeah.
Now, many of these conferences, most of these conferences, actually all of these conferences in the ICOT series, have had a large component on education.
Yes.
How would you say excellent but not enough and caveman thinking apply to education?
Well, because education is, as you say, caveman thinking. It's there to teach youngsters how the world works, situations arise, what you do. In other words, the past, bringing the past to operation in the present, which is excellent, but it's not enough. There are schools, thousands of schools around the world, using some of my work in teaching thinking, particularly in perception, because teaching logic is not enough, and so on. So now one of the big problems with thinking was that in the Middle Ages, the church was involved in thinking. The church ran schools, universities, and thinking and philosophy. The church, quite rightly, was interested in thinking to find the truth, to find the truth. The truth in its support of its own belief structure, and the truth in proving heretics wrong. So we developed thinking as a tool for finding the truth. And to this day, that's how most people regard thinking, which leaves out huge parts of thinking, thinking for action, thinking for design, thinking for creativity, thinking for creative value. Huge areas of thinking which are completely neglected because we believe thinking is only to find the truth. Now, there's a new word I invented recently, which is Think Edward. Edward's my name, but Think Edward. Edward means thinking towards an effective design. ED means effective design. So you have words like inward, outward, upward, downward. You have Edward, thinking towards an effective design. That's what most operational thinking is.
Why put design in the foreground?
What's that?
Thinking toward an effective design. Why put design in the foreground? What's key about design?
Design is putting things together to make something happen. Not just to describe things, but to make something happen. Design is operative. You can design how you do something, you can design a new invention. Design is putting things together to achieve the results that you want. So design is making things happen, not just describing them. Describing has a value, yes, it is excellent, but making something happen.
When I think back on your work over the years, this notion of what's operational seems to be very much in the foreground.
Yes.
There's something magnetic about that notion of getting things to work in the world.
Yes, absolutely right, because doing things, making things happen. For instance, traditionally we felt that argument was enough. Argument is a form of logic, proving the other person wrong, and so on and so on. Instead of that, I have the 6 hats. The 6 hats is a way of exploring a situation where you go through the 6 different types of thinking: information, positive, negative, creative, and so on. And interestingly, this system was used in New York in juries, and using the 6 hats, they reached unanimous decisions very quickly. J.P. Morgan, the finance house in New York, used it, and their meetings were 1/10 of the time of their normal meeting. So it's very active. It produces results. So 6 hats is instead of traditional argument. Traditional argument is just exercise of logic and ego. And 6 hats is generally exploring the subject. And now it's very widely used around the world.
Edward, you like to make up words. Could you say something about that? You have a kind of a poetic enthusiasm for elegant labels on things.
Well, I think there are a lot of words we need to describe things that don't have words at the moment. For instance, my latest book needed a new title. It is Thinking to Create Value. Now, we don't have a particular word for that, so I invented a word. The word is bonting, B-O-N-T-I-N-G. Bonting comes from bonum, bonus, and of course de bono. So bonting is thinking to create value. We don't have a word for that. So imagine a meeting and everyone's going around the table, analyzing the figures, and someone hits the table and says, that's fine, that's excellent, now let's do some bonting. Let's start creating some value. So there are a lot of things in our life which need new words because they need new action. We believe we're full and complete in all we do and all we think, which is totally far from the truth. We're not complete by any means. There are big, big gaps.
When we were talking about value yesterday, you also shared another concept that seemed provocative to me. I think it was value dream. Can you say something about value dreams?
I'll talk about 2 words, value dream and value sensitivity. Value dream in value thinking is similar to the hypothesis in science. In science, it's the hypothesis, we believe this is so, and now we work to try and prove it is so. Value dream, you have the value dream first, and then you say, now how can we make this happen? Suppose we have a value dream that whenever you get on a bus, you get off the bus with something extra, something beneficial you hadn't had before. Okay, so how do we make that happen? Then we might say, suppose when you go on the bus, you increase the chance of making a new friend. Then we say, yes, but how could we make that happen? Well, one way is you have a little yellow card, and if you put that on the back of the seat in front of you, it means you're willing to talk to anyone. So the person next to you can talk to you and so on and so on. And if you take it off, it means enough, I don't listen anymore. So a way of getting value. Now, the other point is value sensitivity. At school, we learn about critical sensitivity. That's wrong, that doesn't work, that doesn't fit the facts, that doesn't fit experience. That is excellent, we need it. Value sensitivity means the habit of mind at looking at value. I'm going to give you a very simple little exercise which I want you to think about. I'll only give you 1 minute. Suppose the good Lord decided to make everyone with the right leg shorter than the left leg. Everyone was born with the right leg shorter than the left leg. Now just think, you can discuss it with your neighbor if you like, what values would that create? I don't just mean values for shoe designers and that sort of thing, no. What other values would that create? Just think for it, 1 minute. Everyone with the right leg shorter than the left leg. Think about it. Okay. Okay.
Please.
1 minute. That's your 1 minute. I'm just going to give you two simple examples which I'm sure you've thought of. One is that if the right leg is shorter than the left leg, when you're going down the road, if you're going this direction, you walk on the right side, so your shorter leg's on the pavement. And if you're going the other way, you walk on the left side, so shorter legs on the pavement. From that, we would move on to, in the middle of the pavement, we'd have a little ridge. And so people going one way, one direction, one the other direction. So people wouldn't bump into each other, because everyone's walking in one direction. That's one. Then, if you were dancing with someone, you could not dance face to face, because you'd be swinging in opposite direction. So if you're dancing with someone, you have to dance face to back. And if you dance face to back, it doesn't matter what the other person looks like. So these are all possible values of the shorter leg. I'm sure there's many others you've thought of too. So value sensitivity should be part of education. Critical sensitivity is essential, yes, absolutely. But value sensitivity, situation, say, what is the value? Because if you develop value sensitivity, it's easier to be creative, because when you have an idea, you immediately can see the values of that idea. So there's value thinking, value sensitivity.
Well, here we are, 2015. What value dreams and value sensitivities do we very much need right now? What are our blind spots?
Well, the blind spot is some additional thinking. Many years ago, I had meetings at the United Nations in New York, and Kofi Annan, the Secretary General, was there, and I was trying to get a group to develop some additional ideas, some new ideas, some creative ideas. It proved to be totally impossible, because all the people there said, we are not here to think, we're not at the United Nations to think, we're here to represent our countries. So we must think what our countries want us to think. And if we thought differently, our country would not be pleased. So one of the concepts I have is to set up a palace of thinking, which would have the task of bringing people together to think differently, think creatively, think additional thought. And it would also serve the purpose of bringing together different ideas from all over the world. For instance, in my experience, I found that business people are much more interested in thinking than any other part of society. The reason is obvious, because in business, your thinking depends how successful you are, how much money you make. And there's no other part of society where your thinking has such an immediate effect. So the palace of thinking would be able to bring together ideas, bring together people, to develop additional ideas on world problems and world situations. So that's a big project I'm working on at the moment.
The business theme has also been a prominent part of the ICOT conferences. We talked a little bit earlier about education. What would you say are characteristic limits of thinking in the business world, given that it's so proactive and action-oriented, which is a good thing? Is there a dark side?
Well, let's look at education for a moment. In most countries, certainly in the United Kingdom, history plays a huge part in education. This is how the world is, this is what happens in 1066, this is what happens in 1565, and so on and so on. History. There's a big subject missing in most schools, as far as I know, which instead of history, it's now story, now story. How is the world working today? How does business work? How do unions work? How does politics work? The story of now. What is the world doing now? Not history, what happened 100, 200 years ago, but what is happening now in the world. And as far as I know, there's no education system which emphasizes now story, and that's a very important need.
It sounds to me as though your early work, Mechanisms of Mind, underlies just about everything else you've done. I can hear its resonances in lateral thinking, in the thinking hats, and so on. Is that fair?
It could be, yes, it could be. I mean, it's not deliberately so, but it may unconsciously be so.
Well, lateral thinking, you explicitly talk about how it's a process of pattern breaking and how mechanisms of mind, yes, how we get trapped in the old patterns.
Well, as I said before, humor is the most significant behavior of the brain because it indicates patterns. If you have patterns, then you need to break out of the patterns. For instance, a random word, which is very effective in lateral thinking, means you've got the subject, you take a completely random word, and as you connect up, you open up a different path out of the subject than you had before. So you open up a new pattern, a different pattern. So it all depends on the logical patterns, yes.
What about the thinking hats? Is there a connection between the thinking hats and mechanisms of mind? What would you say there?
Well, there is in the sense that without the thinking hats, we use the patterns set up in a normal discussion of a subject. With the hats, you're deliberately forced to take a different view. So as you take a different view, you reveal to yourself things you hadn't thought of. In that sense, yes, there is.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay. And what about value creation? Is there a connection there to mechanisms of mind, or is that another matter altogether?
No, that's another matter. Value creation means that value is important. I'd say to the church in the Middle Ages, truth was what mattered, not value. Value to them was having a religion was enough value. But today, we need to think of value, how we create value. And so value creation today is as important as finding the truth.
On this theme of pattern breaking, can one go too far? Can one have too much lateral thinking?
Well, the answer is no, because when you get to a point, it has to make logical sense. I'll give you an example. I was in California, and I was talking to about 300 or 500 ecologists, and they said, we've got this problem, people build a factory on the river, people downstream suffer from the pollution, what can we do? So as a provocation, I said PO, which means provocative operation, PO. PO, the factory should be downstream of itself. Now that sounds impossible. Within 1 year, that had become legislation in 15 countries. That if you build a factory on the river, your input must be downstream of your own output. Become legislation in 15 countries. Now that idea could have been thought of 250 years ago, at least, but it wasn't.
Often people say that contemporary society doesn't take the long view, that political settings often take the short view, that around matters of ecology and global warming, there's too much taking of the short view and not the long view. What are your reflections on that?
I agree with you entirely. People want to survive till the next moment. They want to get back to complacency. So there's no real effort to solve problems in a long-term view. No, I agree.
And yet, presumably, our value dreams as a society need to take the long view.
Yes, but it's very difficult to get those dreams supported politically, because politicians only want to survive till the next election. Long-term view is not there.
Funny thing about that.
Well, that's unfortunate, yes.
So, from a lateral thinking standpoint, is there a way to disrupt the pattern? I know that's a big question.
I will think about the answer to that.
Okay, we'll phone you tomorrow night and we want a really good answer.
Yes. Yes. Maybe in democracy, when you elect someone, you have the chance of saying, I elect you for the next government, or I elect you for the next 5 governments. You have the chance of saying that. Because some people you want to elect only for one government. So that would give you more long-term.
Okay, so you did it right there. That would be interesting. That would be a wonderful lateral thinking exercise for us all. How could governments work a little differently so that structurally they would be pressed to take a longer view? That would be exciting.
Well, I say there could be, people's voting could be in terms of long view as well. Now, people wouldn't just vote on the immediate election today, but long-term issues too.
When we were talking earlier about business, we were talking yesterday about business, I think one of the things you mentioned is that one limit you do see in the business world is that sometimes the thinking is too fixated on data.
Yes.
Can you share some thoughts about that?
Well, yes, business believes there's access to data with computers and data storage is so much easier than it's ever been that all you have to do is collect the data and react to the data. So you let the data make your decisions for you, and you feel you can't go wrong because the logic of the data is there. And that has a value, to be sure, but sometimes if you look at the data in a different way, then you come up with a different policy, a different idea. So we need to develop thinking as well as data analysis. Not instead of, but as well data analysis.
One of the characteristics of the contemporary world, and it's been this way for centuries, is that the world runs on expertise.
Was there?
The world runs on expertise.
Yes.
That is to say, you know, I know how to use my watch, but I don't know how to build a watch. Somebody else knows how to build a watch.
Yes.
I know how to use my computer, but somebody else builds it. I live in a house, but somebody else builds it. I only know how to do a few things myself,
yes.
or to build, rather, a few things
yes.
myself. What do you make of that?
Well, David, I wouldn't want to wear a watch designed by you. I wouldn't want to use a computer built by you. So people are good at doing certain things they're doing. That's okay, division of, it's like in medicine, the brain surgeon is not going to operate on your appendix and so on. So specialization is essential. And the question then is to have specialization, but also the ability to look more broadly outside of specialization.
Well, many people in the business world and the scientific world worry about entrenchment, about silos,
yes,
about getting
yes.
too stuck in one specialization. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think there's a right to be worried about that, because we do need to take a broader view as well as a specialized view, yes. So I think people should be trained to take a broad view as well as a specialized view.
And presumably lateral thinking and thinking
yes.
hats and so on can help
yes.
with that process. By the way, I noticed you're wearing a watch around your neck.
Yes.
Can you tell us something about that?
Well, let's look at the most obvious reasons for wearing a watch around my neck. Well, I was getting irritation on my wrist.
Okay, fair enough.
So I decided to wear my watch in another way, and being like-minded, I wanted to make it available and visible to everyone.
And I'm learning to read time upside down now.
Yes, that's it. That's it.
Very nice. Okay. Let me give the audience a heads up that in a couple of minutes we will turn to questions. Edward, is there something else on your mind you'd like to share with the group today?
What?
Is there something else on your mind you would like to share with the group today before we turn to questions?
No, I'll just repeat what I've said. We don't take thinking seriously enough, and quite wrongly, we believe that our thinking is sufficient, excellent in all areas, whereas it is Edna, excellent but not enough.
Excellent, but not enough. And certainly that could be the banner for the international conferences on thinking. There's a lot in the world that works very well indeed, and we don't want to let go of it, but we always have to be asking, what more can we do with what we have? Well, let me suggest that we take a quiet minute, think about what questions you might have, and I believe we have a traveling microphone. Are there microphones? Yes, there are. So let's just take a quiet minute, and then we will engage a process of question and answer for a few minutes. So take that minute. I thought that went very well. Right here. Where's Ah. Okay, just a moment. We need to figure out the microphone.
Shout.
You can try. Try shouting, and I will repeat if I repeat for the audience.
So my question is, now that we were talking about how society reacts to the fact that now with technology we have the possibility before, if you wrote something, you need a publisher to publish it if it was good enough on Eduthink, or if you wanted to create something, you needed to go to a company that will create a design, prototype it for you, and they make it. But now you have it in your home, you can publish it on the internet, people are going to read it. You can actually get a 3D printer and print whatever you want. How is that going to affect society and the way of thinking, and how do schools need to react to that fact? That was my question.
Okay, let me repeat that. Right. There are two parts to the. Let me see. The question is about digital communications and how digital communications free us in communicating with the world and our audiences from the usual publishing processes. And with that as the frame, there were two questions at the end. What were the two questions at the end?
The thing is that you now are able to either publish or create yourself.
Yes.
No needing someone to say it's good.
So the question
Is how is that going to affect society and thinking?
Okay, stop. That's one question. We'll get the other one in a minute. It's a question about prediction. How is the ready publication of ideas through the internet going to impact society?
Well, obviously,
And you have one sentence to answer that. I'm just kidding. Obviously, that's a huge question. What are your thoughts?
There's two aspects of it. One is that ideas are made visible and other people can start using them. The other is that it's very difficult to maintain your rights in the idea because everyone copies it and uses it and you don't get any value out of it. There's those two sides.
So it's kind of a paradox in the way.
Yes, yes.
Simply because we can share so easily,
Yes.
It allows the value of our ideas to spread,
Yes.
but it devalues them economically, so to speak.
Yes.
And, you know, this is a problem in the music industry with
Yes.
all this concern about pirating and
That's
so
right.
forth and
Yeah.
so on. And the second part of the question was, there was a second question.
Yeah, well, the fact, like, it was about the internet and also about the fact that you're prototyping in your house. You can make things happen from your house. Can I?
Well, I'm pleased that the performance of the microphones is consistent.
So also the fact that you can make things, and how does schools need to react to that? To teach kids that now it's possible to make whatever you want.
Okay, this is about basically education and empowerment. How does this digital world empower us to help kids to create in more ways? Any thoughts about that?
Well, it could, in the sense that if you have an idea and you invite people to develop the idea, improve the idea, then that's something which can only happen now and could not happen in the past. That could be value.
Thank you. Can we have another question, English or Spanish? And let's see if the microphone is working.
Dr. Bono, I have a brief question. Not working? Doctor, in your experience, sir, what is the biggest barrier to improving thinking in society?
What's that?
What's the biggest barrier to improving thinking in society?
Very simply, complacency. The belief that we have wonderful thinking, it's perfect, it has done us well for the last few hundred years, so it doesn't need to change, doesn't need to be taught. Complacency, that's the biggest barrier, complacency.
You know, complacency is an interesting answer, because if we think about something like healthcare. Society is absolutely not complacent about healthcare. Everyone is concerned with healthcare.
Yes.
Everyone wants to be healthy. Everyone wants to have a good medical system.
Yes.
But thinking, well,
Well, no, what the difference is that in medical care, if you have an illness or a disease, people can see the progress of that disease in a bad way. So if we had an organization which had a look at some of our existing concepts and mapped out how badly they were doing, then we might pay more attention.
didn't you have an idea a few years ago about badges on one's chest or something like that?
Don't remember.
I don't remember that one, but what if we had a thinking index on our chest?
Maybe.
Maybe it measures degree of brain activity, and when your brain activity drops, the button, the temperature of the button goes down.
But brain activity is not enough. You may have someone with a very active brain in a very useless or nasty way. So activity is not enough.
You have a point there. I'm going to toss in a question here. How do you grade thinking to good and evil? Couldn't your thinking tools just as well be used by Adolf Hitler?
Well, the answer is yes, absolutely right. If you improve thinking, that better thinking can be used by good guys and bad guys, yes. But if you want the opposite extreme, so let's do absolutely nothing about thinking, so the bad guys will be pretty stupid as well as the good guys.
Can we have another question, please? From somebody with a loud voice.
Exactly, yes.
Do you have a loud voice? The lady in the red dress.
We need to use the micro because otherwise we have no translation.
What was that?
They need to use the mic for translation, but the mics aren't working terribly well, are they?
Oh, right. Look.
Come on.
Take my microphone.
Come on.
This works. Give them this. I have a big voice.
Yes, but you'll need it when you speak.
No. I'll cuddle. I'll manage. Do you have this one? Maybe this one will.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes. Okay. So I can't see Edward, but I've been lucky to hear him in Phoenix and also in Melbourne. And I want to ask, it's so important for our Generation Alpha and Generation Z students, what should we stop doing in schools? We talk about all the things we should do and we confuse ourselves and we feel so stressed. What should we stop doing in schools, in 21st century schools?
Okay, the question is, what should we stop doing in schools?
Well, there are many subjects we can reduce. We can reduce history, as I say. And if you look at any individual schools, there are many areas that should spend a lot of time on, and we can reduce time on that, reduce time on geography and so on. Thinking is more important than any other subject except perhaps mathematics. So there's a lot of things we can reduce.
Now, many parents would say that actually what's most important is not thinking, but inculcating values, social values. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, my thought is that parents should use exactly the skill in thinking to develop the social values. As if the children learn thinking at school, the parents can direct that thinking at social values as well.
Fair enough. Another question, please. Or not. Yes, please. Hi.
Excuse me, could you try this?
My microphone is coming your way.
Okay, I would like to ask you, great, I'm the lucky one. How would you describe emotional thinking?
What's that?
Say again, please.
How would you describe, Edward, emotional thinking?
How would you describe emotional thinking?
Emotional thinking means thinking which is taking place either in arousing emotions or taking place while emotions have already been aroused. And the point is to be conscious of it, to be aware of it, to be aware that your thinking at that moment has an emotional aspect to it. That's the most important thing. Over time, you'll be able to reduce it, but at the beginning, just be aware of it, to say, my thinking at this moment is very emotional because of this, because of this. Be aware of it. That's the important thing.
Thank
Let
you.
me add this question. Can emotions play a positive role in thinking?
The answer is yes. If there are positive emotions, they can play a positive role.
Can you give us an example?
Well, obviously, if you're trying to solve a problem, that's positive. And if your thinking helps you solve the problem, that's positive. Yes.
Is curiosity a
Yes.
positive emotion?
Yes,
Yeah?
I would say so, yes.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Uh-huh. Okay, great. Thank you. Another question, please. Yes, please. The gentleman. Yes. Just a second.
I have a simple question. How do you see the relationship between capitalism and democracy?
Could you say that a little more slowly and loudly, please?
Loudly. So how do you see, Dr. Edward Bono, the relationship between capitalism and democracy?
Could you get that?
No.
Could you get that?
The relationship between capitalism and democracy.
Oh, okay. Okay, we have a 30-second question for you. The relationship between capitalism and democracy.
Well, they can both coexist, or one can drive out the other. Both possibilities.
They both can coexist, or one can drive out the other. Both possibilities. Now, I have heard today's China, mainland China, characterized as an interesting combination of capitalism but not democracy. Do you have any reflections on that?
Well, China has become very interested in my work. The University of Beijing has been doing research for 9 years on my work in schools in China, and they're very enthusiastic about it and using it a lot. So they're going to do some thinking work in China, yes.
Thank you. Another question, and we can certainly have questions in Spanish. We're all set up for it, are we? Yes?
Yes.
Yes,
We can
we're all
hear
set
them.
up for it. So questions in Spanish are welcome. No hay un problema. Sure. Please, just a second. Sure. Yeah.
Thank you. A lot of the discussion around thinking skills and helping young people think is based in institutions. So as a dad of a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old, what can I do with my wife to help my children think better, because their life is not all school?
Because their life is not what?
It's not all about school.
I didn't completely catch that either.
That's
Can you-
maybe the Scots can get translated into English.
I'm sorry, but I'm afraid we can't hear it from here.
Actually, the sound on stage has a lot of echoes. So,
In short, what can mums and dads do to help their own children?
okay. What can mom and dad do to help their own children to become better thinkers?
Well, there's a book of mine called Teach Your Child How to Think.
Okay, so buy the book. Well, let's have one more question, and I happen to know that Anna and Javier have an honor to bestow, so I think we can turn to that. Are Anna and Javier here? You all set for that? Yeah, okay, so is there one more question? Yes, over here, the lady. let's have one more question, and then we'll turn to that.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you tell me, is there any proof in thinking in the past decade? Is there proof for it? We are doing well.
Is the question, is there something we're doing well in the last decade?
Yes, I think the question is there proof that
Is there evidence that we are doing well with thinking?
That we're doing thinking well.
Do you see signs that thinking is improving in the last 10 years or so?
In general terms, probably not, or if so, slightly, yes. But in terms of individual schools, individual people, probably yes, there are some improvements, yes.
I would say that one of the things that I'm encouraged about is the 21st century skills movement or the European competencies or similar frameworks around the world. Those weren't so much there 10 years ago, and certainly not 20 years ago. Now, it's true that one doesn't always see as much action in classrooms as one would like. That is beginning to happen. But the very fact that those frameworks are there and those commitments are there, I think, is a heartening sign. In any case, Edward, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for your wisdom, and thank you for your commitment across all these years. And Anna and Javier, I don't know how you want to do this, but...
Suena.
What's that?
Suena. Sí.
So,
Un aviso importante.
Well, here's an important announcement. There's a bit of a confusion as regards your identity cards for the headsets. So Maria Concepción Rodríguez Ramos has the identity card of Omelia Pardo Gamundi, and Aurelia has to catch a plane to Palma de Mallorca very briefly, very soon. So please, Concepción, wherever you are, Aurelia is here. Thank you very much. And there's something else. There's just one other thing that I would like to mention. You probably remember that we're giving awards to people that have been working for years in the world of education. Well, we also want to give this award. We want to give the Champion Award to Edward de Bono for his magnificent career in researching thought.
This is an award for you.
For your career.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can you stand up?
No.
No? Okay.